Yes, sir. The bells haven't banged in a while, but guess what time it is? It officially third down. Welcome to the first show. It is officially January 4th, 2018. Woo! We have crossed on over and made it to another year. God is so good. God has blessed us one more time to see another year. And I'm so thankful for it. There's been a lot that has happened going in from last year of 17 now into 18 in the world of sports. There's been some firings. There's been some hirings in, well, not so much hirings, but a lot of firings in the NFL and some potential guys who could get hired in the NFL. We're going to get into that. But the big news off the jump, the big elephant in the room, the Alabama Crimson Tide is going back to the national championship game for the third straight season, and they're going to take on who they should have taken on in the SEC championship game, the SEC East champs, the Georgia Bulldogs, who just over a month ago was in the same building and they knocked off Auburn at the time. And remember, Alabama started their season this year in Atlanta to knock off the Florida State Seminoles week 1. So both teams has already played in Atlanta at one point in this year. We're going to get a little bit about that. And we're going to talk about what has happened, how great the games, and how, first thing first, the best game. There was a classic between Oklahoma and Georgia. Not so much Alabama and Clemson, but we're going to break both games down for what it is. And let's go ahead and jump right into it. Off the jump, guys. Once again, it's so good to be back. God is good to us. Welcome to 2018. Welcome back to Third Down. Like I said, I'm your host, T. Wayne the Don. And let's go ahead and get into what it is. On Monday, there will be a championship game will be held as Alabama will take on Georgia. Now, I went on here and I looked at the all-time series. Alabama lead the series 38-25, and there is 4 ties in this series in conference play. Now, once again, it's conference play. There's Alabama right now have a 3-game win streak over Georgia as we speak. That's from years from 2008 to 2015 right now. The longest win streak for both clubs has been 5. The biggest victory Alabama has ever had was 36-0. And the biggest victory for the Georgia Bulldogs was 35-0. It's pretty solid to say that Alabama is the favorite. They are a 4-point favorite for Monday's game against the Georgia Bulldogs at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, the new Georgia Dome, as I call it. What's misunderstood don't really need to be explained. Both teams looking at how many points they score per game is real close, neck and neck. Alabama scored 37.9 points a game, and Georgia scored 36.3 points a game. Both teams Alabama allowed 12 points a game. Georgia allowed 13 points a game. Total yards per game, 449 for the Crimson Tide and 440 for the Georgia Bulldogs. And I really don't have to keep going into details, but there's some guys I want y'all to pay attention that's possibly going in the NFL draft. Calvin Ridley, who's really going to put on the show, Ridley have 59 receptions, 935 yards, and 4 touchdowns on the year. And Nick Chubb, who's to me big stars. Chubb has 205 carries, 1,320 yards, and 15 touchdowns on the year. Not so much now. It's these are some of the guys I think that's going to make big day one impacts when it comes down to in the NFL draft. Looking at the last 5 games for both teams, Alabama's on a 1-game win streak. Let's remember the last time they played was November 25th, 2017. They lost in the Iron Bowl to the Auburn Tigers, 26-14. But before that, all the month of November until they played Auburn, they defeated LSU 24-10. They defeated Mississippi State 31-24, and they defeated Murr 56-0. And then on the first of the year, they knocked off Clemson 24-6. Georgia is on a 4-game win streak. Their last loss came against who? The Auburn Tigers back on November 11th, 2017. They defeated Kentucky 42-13. They defeated Georgia Tech 38-7. They defeated Auburn 28-7, and they defeated Oklahoma 54-48 in double overtime on the first of the year. Now, headlines for this game: Kirby Smart, former defensive coordinator for the Alabama Crimson Tide. How fast has he turned around this program? Mark Richt could never put Georgia in these type of positions, and it's starting to show how mediocre Mark Richt is as a head coach, because he runs from success. He's not like he always get talented rosters. You look at some of the guys he has had over the years, like Gurley, Matthew Stafford was all under his regime, and he always get talented guys, but he don't do enough to get over the top to win, put in a championship contender. Like mid-season, when you think of Georgia, when Mark Richt was there, they would be like, "Oh man, they mid-season, they can win the SEC East, they have a chance." That was like, I'm talking about in the BCS era. They have a chance to go undefeated, be in the SEC East, win the SEC East, go to the Georgia Dome at the time, win the SEC, have a chance to play for a national title. That's what we used to think about mid-season with Georgia when Mark Richt was the head coach. It's kind of the same way with Miami. Miami kind of did a lot of similar things as well, what he did at Georgia, but just they run from success. Remember, Miami lost to Pitt at the end of the year, Miami lost to Clemson at the end of the year, and Miami has lost to Wisconsin in their own house, in their own bowl game. Mark Richt is going to show you, I hate to say it, how fast Kirby Smart has turned this program around. Mark Richt is really getting proven that he's not really, he runs from success. He have a long way to go. I don't think Mark Richt's a bad coach, but Kirby Smart turned this program around real quick and got him in the national title game. And I think Georgia hit the stake, because Georgia getting some of the best recruits in next year's class. Georgia is here to stay. But let's talk about how Georgia did it against Oklahoma. Now, I didn't get a chance to really watch this game like I had a chance to watch the second game with Alabama and Clemson, but I did get to see glimpses and pieces of it today on ESPN Classic this morning. And some things my good buddy, shout out to my boy Kellogg's out there, who's Happy New Year to you, cuz. Send you a little sound bite for you. He called me and he told me, he said, "Look, brother," he said, "it really shows it don't matter what system you run in college football. You can run the spread, you can run multiple, you can run the option, you can run any type of system in West Coast and all that. It don't matter what system you run in college football or in football in general. Playing between the trenches is very, very important." And which, I'm a former offensive lineman. I understand that, because one of my former head coach, he had emphasis on running the football, going to open up passing lanes later on in drives and later on in games. So that's very, very important. I understand how important it is to run the football and run at somebody and impose your will. But when I saw some things this morning, I had to go back and rewind some of it. When Georgia hit long runs, let's see how many yards Georgia had in this game when it came to rushing. Georgia had a total of 317 yards rushing. They had two guys running for 100 yards. One ball almost ran for 200. He was only 19 yards away from 200 yards. Sony Mitchell had 181 yards and 3 touchdowns, and Nick Chubb had 145 yards and 2 touchdowns on the day. That is freaking amazing. And at first I thought, well, man, I don't know how they did it, but I saw how they did it, guys. Let me tell you how they did it. Georgia offensive line was blocking one man into another man's lap. If you are a offensive lineman, or if you was a quarterback, shout out to my boy Maturing Quietly, because he gonna know exactly what I'm talking about. If you are anybody who plays on the offensive side of the ball, and sometimes you have to run behind these big guys, and then they can impose their will on the defensive line on the front seven and block a person into another man's lap. You blocking 2 for 1, as we will call it, as linemen. You are doing your job. Georgia did that so many times. And the last play of the game, the defensive end played too much inside and he squeezed too hard. If he would have kept that outside shoulder a little free to make him at least have a chance to bounce back inside and at least stop them from hitting the outside and he ran all the way to the end zone, you never know what can happen. I want to see if Oklahoma could have responded and maybe get a block back on a field goal as well. But he ran all the way to the end zone, touchdown Georgia, and Georgia punched their ticket to the national title game in Atlanta. Now, Georgia, like I said, Georgia ran for 317 yards. But even on the other side, Oklahoma ran for 242. So they both ran the football. Now, don't get me wrong, something I did see also, Oklahoma do have a solid offensive line. They really do. But one thing I really have to say, and I'm sorry, I wanted Oklahoma to win the whole thing because of Baker Mayfield. I'm a big fan of Baker Mayfield. To me, he got the swagger. And if he can really just work on his craft and get better, Baker Mayfield got the swagger like a Odell Beckham. He have a lot of work to do to get better. But Baker Mayfield's the truth. But he don't have a defense. His defensive line is not that great. That's why they didn't win the ball game. And how well as they played in this game, they deserved to win this game. But Georgia did more than enough because they ran right at them. They was more physical than them on both sides of the ball. And they did what they had to do to go to Atlanta. And it was a great game. It was a classic game. Nobody going to forget this game for a very, very, very long time going forward. For a long, long time. So let's look at the other game that happened that night. Right there down there in Mercedes-Benz Superdome in New Orleans. What happened to New Orleans? Let's talk about it. Jalen Hurts, on the day, he only went 16 for 24 for 120 yards. 2 touchdowns with a QB rating of 56.2. But his counterpart, Kelly Bryant, 18 for 36, 124 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a QB rating of 7.2. Alabama, defensively, didn't do nothing special to Clemson at all. And like I told my partner the other day, there was times in last year's game when Alabama took on Clemson last year in Tampa when you saw Alabama would play man coverage. And Deshaun Watson was just so special with Mike Williams. But even though Deshaun Watson was special in general, Deshaun Watson would throw it up to Mike Williams, them 50-50 balls. And there was at least one point in time in that third quarter where Clemson started to try to start taking 50-50 balls. Because remember, that's what kind of got them down the field at one point in time, out physically in Alabama's secondary. But because let's remember, I said it before, even when Alabama played LSU this year, Alabama going to give up the big plays. That's just who they are. They're going to give up the big plays. You just got to hit them when you can hit them. Let's remember, I know there was a play, first game of the year when they took on Florida State. And DeAndre Francois, he hit the big play. There were times where Alabama's secondary is going to give up the big play. But you have to play perfect when you play that defense because they are very, very well coached. They are one of the best coached in the game when it comes to defense. So Alabama's going to give up the big play. But what all they did to me and what I saw, a lot of time they had 2 men over the top. They had a spy on Kelly Bryant. And the defensive line and the linebackers did a lot of stunts and blitzes up front to make the offensive line confused. And they physically dominated the Clemson offensive line to the point where they only ran for 64 yards in the total of the whole game. That was dominant. Very, very, very dominant. Because when you look at the interception ratio, that all came from big people and tipped balls by the defensive line. Big people tipped balls by defensive linemen that's giving it to linebackers. It was all built by the defensive line doing their jobs. It wasn't no hard game plan for Alabama at all to beat Clemson. And it's sad to say because I wanted to see Clemson do more. I wanted to see Clemson really make that defensive line be more responsible instead of them playing their style of game, just coming at you and doing what we do best when we have this one job to do and just come at you and attack you Y'all need to make Alabama line slow down and let them be responsible. Show some motions. So do some zone options, some zone reads. It's very, very hard to run sideline to sideline with this team because they're so quick. But you have to try something, because when you run straight